If you guys want to make a donation for my video making efforts, you can donate to me on Cash App or Patreon. With that being said, let's get straight into it. Shalom people, shalom. Welcome to episode 2 of Family Crest. Today, we are going to be going over the Brocas family. Now for any of you so-called black people that are new, the reason why family crests like these exist is because black people ruled Europe. Do not let them lie to you and tell you the reason why that these exist is because the Caucasians decided to put African slaves on their family crest, which makes no sense because it defeats the whole purpose of a family crest. Of course, a family crest, you're either going to put yourself, your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your nieces, your nephews, so on and so forth. Members of your family. That's why it's called a family crest. You're not going to put another race of people on your crest. It makes no sense. Not even just another race, just another family that's not yours. But I don't want to go off in a tangent. I've already made a plethora of videos proving black people ruled Europe. So with that being said, who was the Brocas family? Now the Brocas family was a noble family of soldiers, knights, commanders, and members of parliament, fighting for the English cause, and they fought for monarchs such as Edward II, Edward III, Edward III's son, the Black Prince, so on and so forth. Now that is just an oversimplified version. Of course, we're going to go into more detail. So what we're going to do, we're going to pick out the most prominent or the most famous family members of the Brocas family. So we're going to start it off with the father, or one of the pioneers of the Brocas family, Sir John Brocas. So brothers, as we read information on Sir John Brocas, what I'm going to do, I'm going to expound on certain topics that are going to be brought out in this article. So John was the eldest son of Arnold Brocas, a Gascon officer in the English army who was killed almost certainly at the Battle of Bannockburn. Now for those who don't know, the Battle of Bannockburn was the first war of Scottish independence, and you had Edward II who led an army against the King of Scots, Robert the Bruce, and Robert the Bruce completely humiliated and decimated Edward II. Of course, that's just a short version. So in 1314, with his two brothers, Bernard and Arnold, he was brought to England, probably to Windsor, where he grew up under the protection of King Edward II. Even before he had reached full age, he had entered the king's service, where he acted as a valet or squire. About 1317, while still a teenager, John married an English girl named Margaret. Not long afterwards, he was making land investments in Windsor, and probably by 1326, he had acquired the nearby manor of Brocas. The two settled down to domestic life, and at least 3 sons and 2 daughters were born of them. And yes, we're gonna go over one of his sons, Sir Bernard Brocas, who was one of the favorite knights of Edward the Black Prince. John seemed to have been early associated with his fellow Gascon and firm favourite of King Edward, Oliver de Bourdeaux, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, the constable of Guildford Castle, and for a short time Windsor Castle too. Both seem to have managed to skillfully steer their way through the troubled times of this monarch's imprisonment, his assassination, and the government of Queen Isabella and her lover Mortimer. And yes, speaking of Queen Isabella, she led a charge against her husband Edward II. But you have to understand, Edward II was one of the worst monarchs in history, who was also a known homosexual. He had 2 boy toys. One of them was named Pierce Gaveston, and the other was what was the dude's name? Hugh Dispenser. And he showered them with gifts, gave them high-ranking positions, so on and so forth. Basically, he treated his boy toys like he should have treated his wife, and also because of the attention he was giving his boy toys, it pissed off a lot of the English barons. But that's just an oversimplified version of events. Brothers, I want to show you something real quick. Brothers, this is an image of Isabella and her lover Mortimer and their knights about to lead a charge to Edward II. What do you see? Look at their faces. As you can see, they all have a darkish, greyish tint to them. Now, why is that? It's almost as if they've tried to scrub the black off with some kind of chemical solution or Tipex. But of course, they're going to tell you it just got dark over time. But just for comparison, brothers, I'm going to show you a piece of tapestry which has not been altered. So you see this here, brothers. As you can see, the Queen, the King on the flag, and the Knights are all so-called black or just black. Now, if you was to try and scrub the color off, it's going to come out in that fadish, greyish color, like the image we saw of Isabella and Mortimer. But this is what these people do. But you see this tapestry here, this is what all the original images would have looked like. Brothers, here's another image of Isabella, her handmaidens, and some knights. Look how washed out and dull the colors are on their faces. The colors look so dull in it, especially on all the women's faces. But brothers, take a look at Queen Isabella. Look at her garments and look at her chest. You see the white part on her garments? Why is that still white? And look at her handmaidens, look at their chest as well. Look at the white part on their garments. How come those white parts on their dresses did not get dark over time? The dullish, fadish color only seems to come from their face, you know, the part where it shows their skin complexion. And when you know true history, you can tell the difference between a remodel and something that has been painted over. So let's continue, starting from the part where I got highlighted. So during this period, both John and Oliver kept their heads down. However, very soon after, the young Edward III took personal control of his kingdom in 1330. Both returned to favour, and John was quickly made master of the king's horse. It is believed that the Gascons were famed for their horse breeding, and John's younger brother Arnold was also master of the horse to Prince John of Eltham at the same time. Dressed in his official blue tunic and white cape, the elder Brocas brother was in charge of all the royal studs across the country. This included Stratfield, Mortimer, and Swallowfield. For those who don't know, those are villages in England. Though the chief stud was in the Great Park at Windsor, vast sums of money passed through his hands as he equipped the English army with every type of steed, from palfreys to great war horses. For the next 30 years, he was to be at the centre of the organisation of the King's Wars with both France and Scotland. He probably began his military career in the campaign to place Edward Balliol on the Scotch throne, perhaps winning his spurs at the Battle of Haldon Hill in 1333. It was during this period that John's daughter Matilda became enamoured of John Foxley, the son of his friend Thomas Foxley, the Constable of Windsor Castle. The two caused their parents quite some anxiety by apparently running away together at the age of 14 and persuading the Vicar of Bray to marry them. As John's importance grew, so did his estates. He purchased lands in the parish adjoining Windsor and Clewer, including the famous Brocas Field in Eton, and also invested in business ventures such as wine merchants and cellar, which he acquired in Windsor. He became the natural choice for the appointment as Chief Forester or Ranger of Windsor Forest in 1334. Bizarrely, 2 years later, he was given the wardship of Nottingham Jail, a period during which the real Robin Hood may have been active there. He managed to throw off this responsibility by 1344. So, starting from the second paragraph. In an attempt to claim his mother's inheritance as heiress of the French throne, King Edward had declared all-out war on France in 1337, and yes, that what pretty much kicked off the 100 Years' War. In order to pay his troops, The monarch banned the sale of English wool abroad, except for the profit of the crown. John was one of those appointed to organize the trade, as well, of course, as continuing to equip the royal cavalry. He appears to have remained in England at this period, though being given the prestigious job of securing the Scottish marches the following year. Around the same time, he succeeded de Bordeaux as constable of Guildford Castle, the town where his brother Bernard was the rector of St. Nicholas Church. He, no doubt, undertook many of his elder brother's duties, for John was one of the busiest men in a stirring age. By 1340, John was with the English army in France and seems to have been given distinguished service at the naval battle of Sluis. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. But for those who don't know, the Battle of Sluis was a naval battle between England and France. So he was certainly knighted shortly afterwards. In 1344, Sir John Brocas was once again called upon to fight for his king, this time in Brittany, under the Earl of Arundel. However, plans changed, and he instead spent the year as an English ambassador in Spain. But later, on a number of trips, he entered into negotiations for the marriage of Prince Pedro to Edward's daughter. He even returned to England with a pair of Spanish horses for the king. By 1346, Oliver de Bordeaux' future stepson, William Trussell, took over the embassy as Sir John was on a campaign with the king again in France. This time, he was accompanied by his two sons, Bernard and Oliver, and I'm gonna go over Bernard. Bernard was one of the favorite knights of Edward the Black Prince. He commanded a large company recorded at the Siege of Calais to have consisted of 1 knight, 14 squires, and 24 archers. They were almost certainly at the preceding battle of Crest too, with the conclusion of a truce the next year. Sir John returned home and as warden of Windsor Hospital, which stood somewhere near the present King Edward VII's Hospital, which made provision for the establishment to receive a permanent chaplain, as well as for divine service to be held in private chapel at Brocas Manor. It seems quite probable that this was a fulfillment of some vow made during the battle. So brothers, since all this talk about Edward the Black Prince and Edward III, I provided you with their portraits. Some of you brothers may already know this. So this is the Order of the Garter, which was started by Edward III. Now to the left is Edward the Black Prince, and to the right is his father, Edward III. And as you can see, they're so-called black, although slightly whitenized. Here's another portrait of Edward III, and at the bottom it reads, Edward III, King of England, 1327 to 1377, stands with a drawn sword. So now we're going to bring it home even further by reading the physical description of the grandfather of Edward III, Edward I. So Edward I was a tall man of 6 feet 2 inches, with long arms and legs, from which his name Longshanks was derived. His hair was black like his provincial mother's. His complexion, swarthy. Then who the heck is this white boy in his portrait? Even if you was to go on the narrative that swarthy meant a tanned Caucasian, does this man look tan to you? But let's get another reference. King Edward I. It was recorded of Edward that he was tall of stature, higher than ordinary men by head and shoulders, and therefore called Longshanks, of swarthy complexion. One more time, of swarthy complexion. So back to Sir John Brocas. Around the same time, Sir John became involved in King Edward's plans to refound King Arthur's Round Table, which eventually emerged as the Order of the Garter, and that's what you brothers can see in the background. The king had blue robes made for him, both for the great tournament at Eltham and that at Lichfield, However, Sir John nor his sons were never made Knights of the Order. There may have been some prejudice against Gascons rising too high, although he probably couldn't have afforded the expense in any case. Sir John was still in high favour though, and in 1348 joined the king's forces in their adventure to foil the plot by Geoffrey de Cherney to retake Calais. I probably completely butchered that dude's name. With the institution of the Garter, foreign knights thronged to King Edward's court at Windsor, so he set forth on a path to largely rebuild his castle there and make it a suitable home for the flower of European chivalry. It is said that this was at the suggestion of King David II of Scots, who by this time was his captive and finding the accommodation at Windsor somewhat lacking. The expanding responsibility of the constable, Thomas Foxley, therefore called for additional help, and in 1351, the king commissioned Sir John and his old friend Oliver de Bordeaux to survey the workmen and their work, to encourage such as did their duty, but to compel those who were slothful. 4 years later, however, the war had rested and Sir John was called abroad once more. The second commission to complete the rebuilding of Windsor Castle was given to William Wickham, a clerk recommended to the king by Bishop Eddington of Winchester, who had worked under Sir John during the first commission. He, of course, eventually became Bishop of Winchester himself, but always remained a firm friend of Brocas and his family. It may have been during this period that Sir John's wife Margaret died, and he remarried a lady named Isabella. They had 2 sons together. So now that we went over the life of Sir John Brocas, I'm now going to summarize everything. So Sir John Brocas was born in 1298 in Gascony. His father was a Gascon officer in the English army who was killed at the Battle of Bannockburn. With his 2 brothers, he was brought to England under the protection of King Edward II, where he grew up as a squire. While still a teenager, in 1317, he married an English girl named Margaret, and he started to make land investments in Windsor. He had 2 sons and 3 daughters by Margaret. He managed to steer his way through troubled times during the reign of Edward II and Isabella. And after Edward II was assassinated, he returned to favour, and John was made master of the king's horse. Of course, as John's importance and influence grew, he purchased lands in the parishes adjoining Windsor and Clewer, including the famous Brocas Field in Eton. He also made business ventures such as wine merchants, which he acquired in Windsor. He was also given wardenship of Nottingham Jail. As King Edward declared all-out war on France in 1337, John was one of the men appointed to organize trade, and of course, he also continued to equip the Royal Cavalry. By 1340, John was with the English army in France, and he was given a distinguished service at the Battle of Sluis, and shortly afterwards, this is when John was knighted. The last time Sir John appears in extant records, he is given cloth and furs from the royal wardrobe in order to have a robe of the king's livery made in 1364, along with 32 belly skins of pure miniver for a hood. He could not have worn it often, for he had died at his Clewer Manor on the 15th of January the following year. So we just went over the history of Sir John Brocas. Now we're going to go over the information on one of his sons, Sir Bernard Brocas. So in the chapel of St. Edmund in Westminster Abbey is the tomb of Sir Bernard Brocas. His family originally came from Gascony in France, where they fought for the English cause. Brocas was a favourite knight of Edward the Black Prince, son of Edward III, and was present at the battles of Poitiers and Cressy. Now, for those who don't know, the Battle of Poitiers was a battle during the 100 Years' War, of course, between the English and the French. In that battle, the English defeated the French under Edward the Black Prince, and of course that led to the capture of King John II of France. And as for the Battle of Crest, you had King Edward III and his men roaming through northern France, and they were attacked by King Philip VI, which King Edward III defeated. He became Chamberlain to Richard II's Queen Anne of Bohemia. Now, for those who don't know, a Chamberlain is an attendant on a sovereign or lord of his bedchamber, basically a chief officer in the household of a king or a nobleman. He married first in about 1354 to Agnes, daughter of Sir Mauga Vavasor of Yorkshire, from whom he was divorced. Secondly, in 1361, he married Mary, daughter of Sir John des Roches. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Both these ladies were heiresses. Sir Bernard was appointed Master of the Royal Buckhounds and Heraldry, an hereditary office held by his descendants for 3 centuries. Catherine, widow of Sir Hugh Tyrrell, was his third wife in 1382. The recumbent effigy on his tomb depicting him in full plate armour with a sword seems to have been a later addition, although an effigy was in place by 1600 when Camden wrote in his guidebook to the abbey. The shield he carried on his elbow has now gone. Although enriched with gold, all the painted decoration had decayed by 1682. An abbey history book published in 1822 says that in the mid-18th century, the whole tomb was painted a yellowish white colour. The tomb was fully restored and redecorated in 1964. I'm going to read that last line once again. The tomb was fully restored and redecorated in 1964. So what does that translate to? Whitewashing. For those of you that have seen my whitewashing of history video, whenever you hear the terms restored, redecorated, refurnished, renaissance, remodeled, that is code for they're going to paint the likeness of their images. On the tomb the inscription reads, "Here lies buried Sir Bernard Brocas, third son of Sir John Brocas, who had a considerable command of archers at the siege of Calais in 1347, and a lineal descendant from Sir Bernard Brocas, younger son of the Earl of Foix in France." Hey, you better not be hating on my French pronunciation. Who came to England with the Norman King William, and in requital of his services had a grant of lands in Hampshire to the then value of £400, which he chose near Basingstoke, and thereon built a mansion house and called it Beaurepaire. Now, throughout this video, I've probably pronounced all the locations and names wrong. As I say many times in my videos, I cannot pronounce these words and locations in their original dialect, whether that be French, Spanish, German, Dutch, so on and so forth, so it is what it is. This Sir Bernard served in the French wars, and being afterwards sent against the Moors, overcame the king of Morocco in battle, and was allowed to bear for his crest a Moor's head crowned with an old Eastern crown. So brothers, this is the Brocas crest with the crowned Moor's head. But going off conventional history that is taught, they always say that the Moors weren't black. So I'm going to read that sentence one more time. So this Sir Bernard served in the French wars, and being afterwards sent against the Moors, overcame the king of Morocco in battle, and was allowed to bear for his crest a Moor's head. So if the Moors weren't black and he was allowed to bear a Moor's head on his crest, why is the Moor's head of a so-called black man? Now, of course, that's going on the conventional history that is taught. It's like when they tell you that all black people come from the line of Ham. Okay, then you have to admit that the original Egyptians are a dark race of people, and by association, you have to admit that the Israelites were also a dark race of people, because the Egyptians and the Israelites intermingled and lived amongst each other and got mistaken for each other. So which one is it? It's just lies on top of lies to cover up more lies. Point being is this: they were all so-called black, and you're not going to put another man on your family crest. So in conclusion, just a little quick summary on Sir Bernard Brocas. He was obviously the son of Sir John Brocas, which means he inherited his estates and wealth. He was also made master of the Buckhounds. He also became Chamberlain to Richard II's Queen Anne of Bohemia. He was also one of the favourite knights of Edward the Black Prince. With all of that being said, if you want to make a donation to my video making efforts, you can donate to me on Cash App or Patreon. Giving all praises to the Most High Yahweh, in the name of Yahweh Shai.